Hello guys, and welcome back to Joe's Ventures. And today we're going to be doing part 45 of our Planet Zoo mod spotlights. We'll take a look at a bunch of different animals and just talk about them and how wonderful our natural world is. And today we got some animals that got copies. We've got like 3 species of agouti that I'll cover today and tomorrow, and then 2 on the next one. So we're going to be doing 10 animals today, but we're just going to be zooming through the agoutis and talking about them. And we will then talk about some really cool animals. So to start with, we've got our first agouti species. We have got the Zara's agouti. Really wonderful little fellow here. So this is Justaprota zari, which is an agouti species that is found in Brazil, Paraguay, and Argentina, and is named after the Spanish naturalist Felix de Azara. So that's where it gets its name. The population is unknown, but is generally considered to be locally extinct in some areas because of hunting, and is listed in vulnerable as Argentina, though is by the IUCN is considered data deficient, which means they don't really have enough information to make a good judgment call. But part of that reason is because they're very hard to study, agoutis in general. So agoutis are usually active during the day, but they're quite difficult to study because they will flee from people and are incredibly shy, especially when humans approach. And this is kind of reference to their solitary lifestyle, so they live by themselves. And then they also are highly preyed upon by carnivorous species, so like cats, snakes, crocodiles. Lots of those animals would be happy to make a meal out of an agouti. Too bad they're very cute though. Though they can be, if they're bred in captivity, very trusting of people. And they'll let out little barks and stuff when they're alarmed, and they're also known as jungle gardeners. So they'll often bury nuts and seeds, kind of like squirrels, and forget where they put them, so that'll help plant the forest. It's a very interesting ecological role. So this is our first species of agouti we just covered. Generally very cute. So we're going to move on to the next one. We've got the black agouti. This should be the black agouti. There we are. So the black agouti is not too dissimilar. That one was a Zara. This one's Fuligosona. It's the same genus, different species. They are found in northwestern Amazon and southern Venezuela, eastern Colombia, eastern Ecuador, western Brazil, and northeastern Peru, so they live around that area. There's also a distinct population in northern Colombia. And these agoutis are kind of large. They get to between 3.5 and 6 kilograms, or 7.7 to 13.2 pounds. And you can see they're overall quite black, grizzled with a white throat. And that's where they get the name the black agouti, because they have a mostly dark pelt. And like other agoutis, they are diurnal, and they will live alone or in pairs and feed on shoots and nuts. These guys generally prefer to live in like thick forests and savannas and cultivated areas in their range. And they are confined into the Amazonian region, where they're found in all parts of that area, and found in altitudes up to 2,000 meters or 6,600 feet and above. And they generally live in close proximity to water, so they'll be found all across streams as well. And they also like to burrow in limestream boulders and such, and along riverbanks. And a little bit of their reproductive characteristics. So a female black agouti is capable of breeding all year round. So this is consistent with them being... also, they're considered seasonally polyestrous, which means the female can go through more than one period of estrus in a single year, so she can potentially have 2 babies in a year. One estrus period can last about 24 hours, and while the estrus cycle can last 30 to 34 days. So furthermore, the also gestation period also average about 104 days, and females are able to produce 2 newborns per litter, so they can have potentially up to 2 sets of babies a year. Really wonderful. And these guys are also considered least concerned. They're doing quite well, unlike the Azores agouti. And now we've got our last species of agouti. We've got the Central American agouti. Really wonderful little guys here, aren't they? So the Central American agouti, or Punstata, is another species of agouti. And these guys are mainly found from the Yucatan Peninsula through Central America to northwestern Ecuador, Colombia, and far western Venezuela. There's also a disjunct population in southern Peru. They kind of just got some disjunct populations, with sometimes the other population being treated as its own species, the brown agouti, which we might cover. But major review of the geographics might cover this. There's also been a lot of taxonomy talk with these guys. There may potentially be just 2 species. It's really neither here nor there. It's just no one's been really looking into it to confirm. And there's also been introduced to Cuba and the Cayman Islands. And though some populations have been reduced by humans and deforestation, large populations remain, so they're not considered threatened, therefore least concern. From the main parts of the range, they get between 3 and 4.2 kilograms, or 16.6 to 99.3 pounds, and typically reddish-orange with a yellowish grizzled on the back. And in the northern Colombia and Venezuela, they tend to have slightly different colorations, like their paws are brownish and things like that. Just depends on their part of the range. The other population that I've mentioned that is sometimes treated as a different species can get between 3 to 5.2 kilograms, or 6.6 to 11.5 pounds. And yeah, grizzled brown, yellowish black, and all these different colors like that. And like other agoutis, they're obviously diurnal, and they live in monogamous pairs. And they generally feed on fruits and seeds, and are quite important for speed dispersal. So that's our 3 species of agouti covered. We did it in a record time, I think. They're not too dissimilar from each other. It's just mainly just morphological differences and differences in range. The taxonomy is neither here nor there, really. But we're going to be moving on to some birds now. We've got to cover some wonderful birds. And all these 3 agoutis were done by Leaf. So remember that. I believe they were ported from Zootoku and Xbox. So remember that. So the next one is done by Bongo Hardwood. We have got ourselves the African sacred ibis. So these guys are a species of ibis that are native to Africa and the Middle East, even though they have been extirpated from Egypt, sadly. They were often very important to the Egyptians. But still really, really awesome animal. Bongo always does a really good job. So they are closely related to the black-headed ibis and the Australian white ibis, which we'll cover next. And there has been some confusing stuff on their taxonomy, but really, really interesting. These guys, an adult individual can get about 68 centimeters or 27 inches long, and they have this all-white plumage with like this black head and dark plumes on its rump. Males are generally slightly larger than males, and they have a wingspan of up to 112 to 124 centimeters, or 44 to 49 inches, and weigh between 1.35 and 1.5 kilograms, or 3 to 3.3 pounds. You can see the bold head and neck hair with the thick curved bill is black. That kind of gives them their look, a really, really interesting ibis look. And they also have this really dark red orbital ring. That's kind of hard to notice on this one. Species, the sexes are pretty similar, but you can see the babies are a little bit more grayish and look really, really cute. They have dirty white plumage and a smaller bill and with some feathering along the neck. And they're usually silent, but they occasionally make puppy-like yelping noises, so that's very, very interesting. So that's talking about the babies. So they are native to sub-Saharan Africa, and they are very, very widespread. They can be found in Iraq as well. I believe they've been introduced into Asia, or native to Yemen, but there have been some records of them flying off to other places, and introduced into Europe, and elsewhere, like the Canary Islands and the Emirates and Taiwan as well. And there's also populations in Florida, I think, with a few individuals escaping from the Miami Metro Zoo. And it seems like they've been living around there ever since. There's like 75 birds and they're believed to be eradicated, so that's good. Not good for the birds, obviously, but good for the environment, because Florida is very notorious for its invasives. Really, really wonderful animals here. So these guys feed mainly on insects, worms, crustaceans, mollusks, and other small invertebrates, as well as other fishes, frogs, mammals, small mammals, reptiles, and carrion. So they're pretty generalist. And they've actually been observed feeding on the contents of pelican eggs brought in by Egyptian vultures in mixed colonies. So that's also very interesting. And they will also find like other nests. They'll raid nests from like Cape cormorants and like jackass penguins, where they'll basically try and steal the nest of other birds. That it's from other birds that have been breaking them. So it's really, really cool. Their most important predator to their nestlings is kind of the African fish eagle, and they do pose a threat. And there's other diseases that can get spread from other birds, such as ram's horn snails and things like that. That can be detrimental to the health, or use them as a breeding post. so they can kind of breed in the bird and then spread. And these guys have a very interesting reproduction cycle. They usually breed about once a year in the wet season, and breeding will begin in March and to August in Africa, to April to May in Iraq. And they will build their nest and often sit in a baobab tree. The birds nest in tree colonies, and often with like other wading birds such as stork herons, spoonbills, darters, and cormorants. They may also form single species groups on offshore islands or abandoned buildings, and they can number up to 100 individuals in colonies, sub-colonies of about 100 or more, 1,000, and can number over 1,000 birds. So these guys usually lay about 1.5 eggs per season, or 125, and they incubated by both parents for about 21 to 29 days, so about a little under a month. After hatching, one parent will stay with the nest continuously for the first 7 days, and chicks will fledge about 35 to 40 days and are independent after 40 to 48 days and reach sexual maturity to about a year and a half after hatching. So they are luckily considered least concerned, with the population considered to be between 200,000 and 450,000 individuals, but appears to be decreasing, and they are covered by the Agreement for the Conservation of African Eurasian Migratory Water Birds, so luckily they're quite good there. And as I've mentioned, there's lots of ties to Egypt. There have been mummified specimens found. A lot of historical accounts mention this bird, so that's really, really interesting and really, really cool. Big fan of these ibis sign. Look at these wonderful, and then look at the baby. So very, very cute. So now we're going to move on to the next animal here. We've got the Australian white ibis, or the bin chicken, as we all love to affectionately call it, the wonderful bin chicken. And you can already see some differences. So these guys are, as I mentioned, a relative of the African scarred sacred ibis, though these guys are a native Australian bird, and contrary to urban myth, and they're not a feral species introduced by Australia from people. So these are a native species to Australia, don't forget that. So they were historically rare in a lot of urban areas on the east coast since the late 1970s. Now they're common seen around Melbourne, Sydney, Brisbane, Townsville, places like that. They've also been common in Perth, which is very interesting. And people have been getting, they often called bin chickens because they raid bins, and they've generally been a nuisance. But luckily they are native. So a tip turkey as well is another name for them. So these guys are fairly big. They get 65 to 75 centimeters, or 26 to 30 inches long, and have this black bowl head, this downturned beak, quite similar to the African sacred ibis. There's also some sexual dimorphism, with the males weighing about 1.7 to 2.5 kilograms, or 3.7 to 5.5 pounds, compared to the 1.4 to 1.9 or 3.1 to 4.2 pounds females. And in comparison, they're quite a bit bigger than the African white ibis. It gets about a kilo. Their body plumage is pretty much almost white, though it may be brown stained. And they can see these black tail feathers as well that you can see here. And they also have these like little, almost like scales going on the back here that really it's a keratin. They also reach sexual maturity at about 3 years old and can reach 28 years in age in the wild. So it's very, very interesting. As I mentioned, they're pretty much found all over Australia, eastern, northern, and southwestern Australia, and also the McCurrick marshes used to be a home to one of the biggest breeding populations, with 11,000 nests in 1988. However, since 2000, there's been barely any reporting there, though that could be potentially just because of other things, disturbance, especially with the pest control things going on there. Hopefully they come back. But they are also absent from Tasmania. Urban populations, as I mentioned, they've been very, very annoying. There've been debate whether they've been invasive, but it's generally considered that they are a native to Australia, and they've been trying to cull them from urban areas, and even release them. They're considered problem species, but obviously they deserve a life, and they're quite cute, don't you think? They're just a general nuisance, and people have been trying to get rid of them from urban areas. And they often do things like snatch people's sandwiches. They'll nest in inappropriate places and competition with captive animals. So that will leave surplus birds being located to sanctuaries or released to other places. And they are generally quite open with what they eat. They'll eat human scraps, but also they eat aquatic vertebrates, terrestrial vertebrates. and also small things. The most favorite food of these guys is mussels and crayfish, which they use their long bill to kind of fish and feed out. And for breeding, it varies locally within the local areas of Australia. So within, generally in the south, they'll be from August to November, and February to May in the north, so the wet season. After the wet season in the north, and they will nest. They'll build like a shallow dish in the sticks, grasses, and reeds, located in trees, and are generally near a body of water, so like a river, swamp, or lake. And they'll continually, commonly nest near other water birds such as egrets, herons, spoonbills, and cormorants, or we like to call them down here shags. I should probably clarify that. 2 or 3 dull white eggs are usually laid that are about 65 millimeters by 44 millimeters, and this clutch will usually then be incubated for between 21 and 23 days. And hatchlings are atricial. That means they really do need help from their parents, so they're naked and helpless at birth, and they take about 48 days to fledge before they get big and go off. And as I mentioned, they take about 3 years to reach sexual maturity, so that's when they go off and do their own thing. Really, really awesome birds. How can you not love them? Let's have a little more look at the babies. Very, very cute. So this one was also done by Bongo Hardwood. How can you not love Bongo Hardwood? He made some very, very wonderful birds here. So now we're going to move on to the next one that was made by Leaf and NicholasLionRider, who's kind of making his way back into the scene. So that's really, really awesome. We have got the Matschies, or how's it? Matschies tree kangaroo. So very, very interesting little guy here. Okay. We'll have a talk. So this one we want to look at. Look at you, wonderful fellow. Very, very cute. So also known as the Huon tree kangaroo, these are tree kangaroos are native to the Huon Peninsula in the northeastern New Guinea island, within the nation of Papua New Guinea. And they are considered an endangered species, sadly, and their scientific name honors the German biologist Paul Matschies, and the indigenous population refers to this as the Bungari. And I think Bungari is a really awesome name. I think we should try and normalize indigenous names a little more. I think that really does help with really giving them their own sort of personality and stuff. With a body-led head and length of about 20 to 23 inches, or about 51 to 81 centimeters, they're much smaller than the red kangaroo, but they're still quite large, about the size of a small wallaby. Adult male can weigh between 30 and 20 and 25 pounds, so 9 11 kilograms. And adult female can weigh between 15 and 20 pounds, or 7 9 kilograms. So, there also no particular season where they breed. Gestation lasts about 44 days, and joeys and captive bred individuals leave the pouch after 11 months. And the average lifespan is, you're having a bit of issues, aren't you? Let's have a look at the baby, since we're talking about babies. So these guys will spend about 11 months in their mother's pouch before they leave and do their own thing. The average lifespan is unknown, but they are considered to live at least 14 years. And there's been the lifespan of a kangaroo in zoo has been about 20 years, so they are 20 years. So they typically 15 to 20 years, probably a good estimate. Look at this wonderful fellow. He's having a good time, is he? So the most distinctive trait from all kangaroos is the hair wall they possess. They have a patch of hair that goes in many directions up near their shoulder, which is pretty weird. And they're similar in size to other species of kangaroos, such as the Doria's tree kangaroo, and they have these small bear-like ears. And they have low sexual dimorphism. The males and females are pretty much the same size, though they are generally, on average, a little smaller, the females. Still really wonderful. They're having a good time. So, yeah, these guys live in mountainous rainforests from about 1,000 to 3,000 meters, or 3,300 to 9,800 feet, and they typically live either alone or small groups, usually comprised of a female, a joey, and a male, and they spend most of the time in the trees, and they occasionally will come down to feed. They're very adept at hopping and can leap up to 9 meters or 30 feet, so they're very good hoppers. They hop through the trees, which is really awesome. And instead of sweating, they actually will lick their forearms. This is a common thing that you see in kangaroos as well. They will lick their forearms to allow the evaporation of the saliva to help keep them cool. And in the wild, they usually feed on leaves, fruits, and mosses, while in zoos they'll feed all sorts of things: monkey biscuits, tofu, eggs, yams, corn on the cob, things like that. And it seems like in the wild they mostly live in small assemblages, as I mentioned, and they're also very closely related to the Goodfellows tree kangaroo, and was once considered a subspecies of it. And they seem to be scared of humans and tend to scramble around when humans are near, so they're difficult to find. They also sleep about 14 to 15 hours, spend about 14 to 15 hours of their day resting and sleeping, and they are known to defending their home territory and marking their boundaries. And the temperature of the environment can drastically change during different times of year, so they're able to maintain body temperature because of their metabolic rate, and they're also found to be very susceptible to mycobacterial infections. However, these infections seem to not be contagious. Some individuals also affected do not appear to get this infection, which is pretty cool. And as I mentioned, their range, they live in a very restricted range. They're restricted to the Hunan Peninsula in Papua New Guinea, which seems to be like lots of deciduous forests and tropical rainforests, and spend most of the days there. They mainly live in the northeastern interior of New Guinea, and their home range is about 25 hectares in this area. So that's kind of where they live, their little habitat there. And there's been some conservation work to help the local peoples there, so the local peoples can help the kangaroos, and so that's really important why getting indigenous people and people that live in these areas into conservation is really, really important. So as I mentioned, they're mainly herbivores. They feed on anything, tree sap, insects, flowers, nuts. They even feed chicken in captivity, which is really interesting. And they can get pregnant all year round. The female's estrous cycle is between 54 and 58.6 days, and tree kangaroos can produce young at 2 to 2.5 years old. And copulation lasts about 60 minutes, and the gestation period is approximately 44 days, which is the longest of any marsupial. And a single birth been observed at the ground in the branches, above ground in the branches. So they typically, while they're up in the branches while the baby is born, and it crawls into their pouch and sucks on the teat inside there until they get to about 22 weeks or 28 weeks old. And that's when they first leave the pouch and feed on their own. And they permanently vacate their pouch in about 41 weeks. So that's very interesting. So in terms of conservation, they're considered endangered because of their restricted range. There are more grassy areas because their habitat's being destroyed, and things like oil drilling, hunting, rainforest clearing have been a big thing. Also, they're hunted by the natives for their meat and fur. But luckily, there's been lots of conservation efforts, as I mentioned. They've been helping the local villagers, so they'll come and, as I mentioned, they'll come and help people. They give them access to a lot of amenities and education and things like that. So they basically come and help and try and take care of the peoples that help take care of the kangaroos. So they'll hire local peoples to basically become rangers, and they will monitor the population. So that's really, really cool. It's cool to see these kind of projects getting involved with these guys. Who doesn't love a good tree kangaroo? So that was done by Leif and NicholasLionRider. Our next animal, we're moving on from marsupials, we're moving into reptiles. We've got the black caiman. So a really, really cool animal here. So the black caiman, or Melanosuchus niger, is a large crocodilian ant, along with the American alligator, is one of the largest extant members of the alligator day in the order Crocodilia. It's like other crocodiles, they are a carnivorous reptile that live in slow-moving rivers, lakes, and seasonally flooded savannas in the Amazon basin and other freshwater habitats in South America. Very, very widespread animal. They are very, very large. They grow up to at least 5 meters or 16 feet, and potentially up to 6 meters or 20 feet. That makes them the third or fourth largest reptile in the Neotropical realm, behind the American crocodile, the Orinoco crocodile, and maybe the American alligator. There's kind of some contention there. And as its common and scientific name kind of implies, you can see it's very, very dark coloured. Looks very, very interesting. Though in some individuals it can appear almost black, and they also have grey to brown banding on the lower jaw. But the juveniles, there should be some juveniles in here. We'll see if we can find them. There they are. The juveniles, you can see here, they tend to be a little bit more showy. They have a lot more obvious colours, much more vibrant, with pale and white bellow bandings on their flank. That can be present well into adulthood, at least more compared to other species. But they generally become big and black like these guys here. They are really, really wonderful. I love myself a nice black caiman. So, yeah, they're quite different from other caimans. So basically, since they're very, very superficially similar to alligators, a lot of caimans are a little bit more specialized in doing their own thing. But these guys have basically just become the alligator of the south, so that's really, really awesome. So they also have a bony ringe that occurs, that is present on other caimans. They're also quite large and heavy around the head area, which is a great advantage for catching large prey. Like all crocodile-like animals, caimans, they're low squat with big jaws, long tails, and short legs, with thick scales and osteoderms that they use both for protection and for regulating their body temperature. And they have their nostrils on the top of their heads and their eyes as well, so they can basically watch underwater and be as conspicuous as possible. So these are also the largest predator in the Amazon ecosystem. So they prey on pretty much everything they can get their mouths around. So basically, they'll eat large mammals, large reptiles, fish, birds, anything that's big enough to go in their jaws pretty much will. And there's actually been, they seem to have their own ecological niche that enables coexistence without too much difficulty. And as the largest predator of this ecosystem, they're often considered a keystone species, so they're very, very important species in the local ecosystem, and they play an important role in maintaining it. And in terms of reproduction, it generally takes place during the dry season, where females will build a nest mound with an egg chamber and protect those eggs from other predators. And hatchlings form groups called pods, which are guarded by the female, and it's not too different from other crocodiles, crocodilians technically. And they may contain individuals from other nests as well, so they might be step parents. Though they were once very, very common, like most things, they are a lot less common now. So they kind of made a huge comeback though, because they used to be hunted for their hides, similar to alligators. Their hides were used for boots and other clothing and things, so that really caused their population to drop. Though they have now made a comeback, but now they're considered conservation dependent. So they're basically required to have some sort of conservation presence, be that reintroduction programs, be that reintroduction programs, laws to prevent people hunting them, management. They just need to be managed so the species will be living on into perpetuity. So that's awesome. And there's been little known species that were not researched in any detail until the 1980s, where the leather trade had really taken their toll on their populations. And they are a dangerous species, like any other crocodilian. They are a large predator, so if you're ever in South America and you go swimming, you got to be careful of these big caimans. Though there should be a lot of other things you should be careful about as well, not just the caimans. But these guys are really, really beautiful, and I'm a really big fan. I'm glad they've made a great comeback like the alligator. Really, really interesting animal. I love myself a black caiman. So that was done by Leaf and Megarex Gaming, and now we're going to have a returning animal. You can see here we got the Kouprey. Look at this wonderful fellow. So if you guys remember what the Kouprey was, this was like the potentially the lost bovid. So we can see some updates here. I'll quickly go over them. We can see on the horns are now a bit more frayed, because they were quite charismatic, characteristic of the Kouprey, that they had like frayed ends of their horns, and just some general touch-ups here and there. I think it looks much nicer. But these guys are really, really interesting, as I mentioned. Their name means forest ox, or known as the Kouprey, which means grey ox. They're a little-known forest-dwelling bovid that lived in Southeast Asia, and sadly have not been seen since 1970. And though there has been lots of tracking surveys to try and document them, though that failed in 2011, and they've been considered critically endangered or possibly extinct since 1996. So these guys are quite big. They measure 2.1 to 2.3 meters, or 6.9 to 7.5 feet long, along the head and body, and not counting their 1 meter tail, and about 1.7 to 1.9 meters tall, so 5'6" to 6'2" high at the shoulder, and they weigh between 680 to 910 kilograms, or 1,500 to 2,010 pounds. Though there have been unverified reports of them being up to 1,700 kilos, or about 3,700 pounds, but that's considered dubious. And you can see they're quite they're quite similar to the next animal we'll see, but you also see they're quite similar to Gower. They have these large dewlaps that help with thermoregulation. They've got this humpback and They got these really large horns with the frayed ends. That's really, really cool. And both sexes seem to have the notched nostrils and the long tail as well. And as I mentioned, these guys are the national animal of Cambodia. So they have been found around that area. Southern Laos, Vietnam, that's where they usually live. They're thought to be extinct, and all other areas outside of Cambodia. Though they're still extant, there's some national parks and wildlife sanctuaries where they could live, but there's just really no one looking. So they could potentially be out there. So they typically live in partly forest hills and eat mainly grass. Their preferred forest is open savannas. They're thick monsoonal forests, and they are diurnal, and they usually travel up to 15 kilometers at night. And they live in herds generally of up to 20 that are usually led by a single female, and these herds will consist of cows and calves, but have bulls during the dry season, while the older males will make bachelor herds and kind of hang out with each other. And these guys were known for eating kind of bamboo, grasses, anything they get their mouths around. Though sadly, to go with their status, there's believed to be fewer than 250 living in the world, and some people think they're potentially already extinct. A lot of the reasons for, we'll have a look at the baby. A lot of the reasons for this could be uncontrolled hunting by soldiers during the war and also locals, hunting for their meat and horn for traditional medicines and food, diseases from introduced cattle, and loss of habitat due to agriculture and logging. And luckily, they're legally protected pretty much all where they're found, even though they might not be found there anymore, or where they used to be found. Sadly, there's no captive population, though there was one sent in a zoo in a Venice Zoo, or how you pronounce that, in Paris in 1937, and died during World War II. But there have been lots of surveys trying to find them, but really they just haven't been able to find them yet. Though Indonesia, there's a lot of places that aren't really well explored or well sampled, so it's very possible they could still be around. And who knows, if you guys want to be the one to find them, you could go have an expedition yourself and see if you can find the Kouprey. It'd be very important for conservation. Really, really wonderful animals here. How can you love a Kouprey? And now it's been updated to look like one. So that was by Leaf and Monsoon. And we're moving on next. We've got our second to last animal, also done by Leaf and Monsoon. We've got the Indo-Chinese Banteng. So that's another bovid. So a close relative, actually, of the... this is the male. Here's the male. He's sleeping. Good boy. But the Banteng, also known as Timbadu, is a species of cattle also found in Southeast Asia. Their head to body length is roughly about 1.9 to 3.8 meters, so about 6.2 to 12.1 meters long, with wild Banteng being typically larger and heavier than their domesticated counterparts, though often similar in appearance. The Banteng shows pretty excessive sexual dimorphism, with adult bulls being generally dark like this, as you can see here, brown to black with more sturdier frames, and thicker and usually with larger horns and all that. There's a big white patch on their rump. Though the horns are present in both sexes, they typically get between 60 and 95 centimeters in length, or 24 to 37 inches. And 3 subspecies are generally recognized. The Indo-Chinese, I think the Javan and the Borneo, I believe that's it. Look at these wonderful guys. This is the female here, you see the comparison. They're generally active during the day as well as night, though the activity at night is more active when the area is frequented by humans. They avoid humans by coming out at night. Herds are usually composed of 2 to 40 individuals and are generally led by a single bull. Though they're herbivores as well, so they feed on grasses, sedges, shoots, flowers and fruits, things like that. And they also can survive without water for long times during droughts, which is also very interesting. But they drink regularly when they can, especially from standing water. And not much is known of their reproductive physiology, but it might be similar to what's seen in touring cattle. So after gestation, there's nearly 285 days of gestation, about 9 to 10 months. A week longer than other touring cattle, a single calf is born. And these guys live in these general habitats like deciduous forests, evergreens, lower mountains, abandoned farms and grasslands. So they're very, very generalist in their habitat, so they can pretty much eke a living wherever they want. Where's the dad? There's the dad. We'll talk about... There's dad, and we'll have a look at the babies. Look at these cute little babies. The largest populations of the wild Banteng occurs in Cambodia, Java, and potentially Borneo and Thailand. And domesticated Bantengs live in Bali and other smaller islands such as Sulawesi, Sumba, Australia, New Guinea, and Malaysia. Malaysia, how do you pronounce that? There's also fewer populations in Northern Territory in Australia, and they're usually primarily used for their highly demanded meat, used as draft animals to a lesser extent. Though the wild Banteng is considered endangered, and populations have decreased more than 50% in the last few decades. There's also been rampant poaching for them because of their food, game, traditional medicine, and horns as well. So, and also habitat loss and fragmentation, and also diseases brought from feral populations of cows, and also diseases brought from like taurine cattle and other types of cattle, domestic cattle as well. Though luckily they are protected in most of their range, and are largely restricted to potential protected areas, sadly, though hopefully that will change soon. And another interesting tidbit of this guy, this is actually the second endangered species to be successfully cloned, and the first clone to survive beyond infancy. So these, what happened was they basically they cloned a Banteng and put the baby in the womb of a domestic cow and carried the baby to term, and we had a baby Banteng. So that was really, really awesome. Really, really wonderful. So that could be a really interesting avenue to help with endangered species, and they already do that with like Przewalski's horses. There was one called Kurt that was born, and he's doing pretty well actually. I think that's really, really awesome. And speaking of horses, I think you can see our last animal there. So our last animal today was done by Narwhalo. How can you not love Narwhalo? And Leaf and Monsoon, who did the two guys here, the Kouprey and the Monsoon, not the Monsoon. I'll say Monsoon is the name of the guy, not the name of the bovid, but the Banteng. But we have got here, by Narwhalo, the Kiang, which is also known as the Tibetan wild ass, or the Gokhe, I had to pronounce that. But these guys are the largest of the Asian asses, you could say, and they are native to the Tibetan plateau, where they inhabit mountain and alpine grasslands, and are currently restricted to the area and northern Nepal. And as I mentioned, they're quite large. They get to average about 13.3 hands, or about 55 inches, or 144 centimeters. And they range from 132 to 142 centimeters, or 52 to 56 inches high at the withers, with a body that's 182 to 214 centimeters, or 72 to 84 inches, with a tail that's about 32 to 45 centimeters, or 13 to 18 inches. Though they only experience some slight sexual dimorphism, with males weighing between 350 and 400 kilograms. I believe this is a male. No, it's a female. The male should be over here. Yeah, I can see him over here. He's a big boy. The males are generally between 350 to 400 kilograms, or 770 to 880 pounds, while females weigh between 250 to 300 kilograms, or 550 to 660 pounds. And you can see they have this quite large head with a blunt muzzle and convex nose. They have an upright mane and this really cool, beautiful chestnut color that they got going on, that is darker brown in the winter and gets more reddish in the summer, where the animal will molt. A lot of it's fully like its wool. And its summer coat is 1.5 centimeters long, and that winter coat is actually double the length, about 3 centimeters. And then the legs, upper ends of the muzzle, and inside the ears are all white, as you can see here. White, white, white. Really interesting patterns. So yeah, these guys are closely related to the Ognar, what once considered a subspecies, though they may be even closely related to some extinct species of equus that were found in America in the Pleistocene. Though it's kind of neither here nor there. Though it's just they can also crossbreed with horses, zebras. Though like mules, they can't really produce babies. And they've never been domesticated, so these guys are a wild horse. Really, really wonderful. So as I mentioned, they live in the Tibetan Plateau between the Himalayas and the Kulin Mountains, and that's restricted to almost entirely living in China. So they're also the Eastern Kiang, the Western, Eastern, and Southern Kiang, so there's different subspecies, though we don't really know that. But Numbers up to 2,500 to 3,000 also found in India as well, though they're generally considered least concern, so there's a lot of population. But most of them are found in China. They live in alpine meadows and steppe country between 2,700 and 5,300 meters, or 8,900 to 17,400 feet in elevation, and where they prefer these flat plateaus with wide valleys, with lots of grasses, sedges, and low-lying vegetation for them to eat. And this open terrain, along with feeding them, it also allows them to be easy to detect predators, so they can just run and hide when they need to. And it's like all equids, they're herbivorous, so they feed on sedges, grasses, meadows, things like that. Especially during the winter, they'll be like, they'll eat shrubs, they'll eat other herbs, even roots, because they're desperate. They sometimes drink from water. These kind of waterholes are very rare, so they're more likely to obtain most of their water from the plants they eat, or potentially from snow. So they're a desert animal, they're adapted for that. Since, even though it's got lots of grasses and stuff, free-flowing water in these areas is very, very rare. It is technically a desert if you go by the measure of rainfall, even though it's not much technically sand and things. Very, very interesting. So, in terms of their only real predator is the Himalayan wolf, which potentially could be its own species in itself. And they defend their babies by forming a circle where they'll put their heads down and kick violently, like horses do. And usually horses will only attack single animals, not horses, wolves will attack single animals that have strayed from the group. And also they do not really, they sometimes gather large herds up to several hundred individuals. However, these herds are not permanent groups, but they're kind of temporary groups. They live in fusion fission groups, so that means individuals move in and out. So they typically live in small groups with like young males only, all mothers in their folds. All the males are typically solitary, and they'll defend a territory of about 0.5 to 5 kilometers squared from rivals, and they will take any females in that local area as theirs. And they also get quite territorial towards intruders, so they'll kick and bite them, even braying and like threat displays and threatening the areas, making them look all big and dangerous. So now we'll have a look at reproduction. Look at this wonderful little fellow. I love his bright colors. Really, really beautiful. So they typically mate between late July and late August, with older males tending to tend reproductive females by trotting around them and then chasing them. The length of gestation has been variously reported between 7 to 12 months. Just not that well studied, but they usually give birth to a single foal. And females are able to breed again almost immediately after birth, though births every other year are more common, and foals can weigh up to 35 kilograms or 77 pounds at birth, and able to walk within a few hours of life, or a few hours of being born. And the age of sexual maturity in these guys are unknown, but it's probably about 3 to 4 years, as in the closely related Ongar. And they typically live for up to 20 years in the wild. So very, very interesting animals, and very, very interesting history. Luckily, they're considered least concern, they're doing well. I think the population's in a few hundred, few 100,000 or something like that. A few tens of thousands. Really, really cool animals. I love Kiangs. They're very underrated as well. I feel like this would be a great animal. Like a Przewalski's horse would be perfect for Central Asia pack. I think we need a Central Asia pack. But Nawala, you did a wonderful job with this wonderful horse, and I'm glad you're bringing some lesser-known animals into the game. I'm a big fan. All these people did a wonderful job. Monsoon, Leaf did a great job. MGR, NicholasLionRider, and Bongo Hardwood also did a wonderful job with his birds. I'm a big fan of all you modders. Hopefully you guys keep pumping out these mods. I love doing these showcases and talking about these wonderful animals you make. Thought I'd get that little PSA, because why not? But yeah, I really, really, really hope you guys enjoyed this video. I hope you guys liked and subscribe. Always remember to hit the little bell icon to get notified of uploading anything. So yeah, hope you guys enjoyed this video. Hope you guys like and subscribe. And bye-bye.